This event represents a lot of initiatives of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology and of the government of Tamil Nadu, the government of India coming together in a way that really symbolizes a lot of convergence and significantly what we want to see coming out as industry academia collaboration along with government playing a catalytic role in driving India's technological and industrial progress. We had a historic account of how the centers of nanoscience came into being, what was the thinking behind it, and where we are today, and you will see a lot of that in the exhibitions. And you will see today's future and how it's contributing to the next stage of what India is attempting in the semiconductor space. You also heard about GCCs, which are an important chunk of what the ministry also handles, how that fits into this, and about how artificial intelligence, which is yet another significant element of what the ministry is handling currently, as to how all of these pieces of the puzzle fit in together in what India's larger mission is. Being a historian by training, it was very good to hear about where it all started. A few months ago, we had an event in IIT Bombay to actually have a sort of a reunion of people who had been part of the Indian Nano Users Association program, the INUT program, where many of you were also present. And we were fortunate enough on that occasion to actually have Dr. R. Chidambaram with us for that event. And of course, he's no more with us, but I think it's a good occasion to remember. And thank you for drawing our attention to his catalytic role at that point in time. And sometimes when you look back on these events and incidents, and I'm only reminded that on the one hand there was the research element which is going on, and on the other hand there was also the first attempt at attempting to establish a semiconductor unit in India at that time. I don't want to name the company. There was a fairly large American company which was looking to set up a plant in India at that point, identified the location, figured out everything else that needed to be done. As part of some of the crucial meetings which took place there, the sticking point was a grant, $100 million grant which they wanted for establishing the industry. And at that point in time, an outright grant from the government of India to actually establish an industry of this nature was unknown. It was not part of policy. And it just fell apart on that one single point. And we moved on. It was, I think, a realization that this is something which needs to be part of the policy armory of the government. And this was added to what needed to be done. The National Policy on Electronics in 2012 recognized that these kind of grants and subsidies are needed. Eventually, it took some more time before the India Semiconductor Mission came. And I think today the point was made that the India Semiconductor Mission is probably one of the most largest and most generous ways in which subsidies and grants are provided. And I don't think we should underestimate this, because I think it's important for each one of us who are present here in this audience. When the Tatas or Micron or any of the other three industries, Keynes Technologies or CG Power, build out these 5 facilities which have been approved, almost 70 to 75% of the money is actually taxpayer money. So each one of us in that sense is a stakeholder there. And we are as much invested in the success of these companies as anybody else. And you can actually see that it's a rigorous process. There are a large number of applicants. 5 have so far been selected. A few more will get selected. They've passed through literally a ringer. They've sort of had multiple levels at which it has been evaluated, multiple experts in the field have looked at what the content of the proposal itself is, and multiple ways have been attempted to see that this is something which will work for the country. Because the investment in the success of this, I mean, there's nobody more invested in the success of this than the government of India, than the people of India. And I think that is what is critical here. And each one of us needs to contribute to this. We've never had, I've spent 35 plus years in the civil service, and if you add another 30 years that I think Abhishek would have spent here, we've never had a program of industrial policy in this country which is so generous, or which is so oriented to success. Which is why I think we are all stakeholders and we have to ensure the success of this. In that sense, I'm extremely happy that we have an assemblage here. We have almost 800 participants, and it's a true mix of everybody being part of this. There are about 300 people who are from an academic background, 172 people from industry, there are 126 people from startups, there are industry associations, investors, incubators, people from the strategic sector, other national labs and so on. And the number of people from the government, fortunately, is only 31. So I don't want to downplay the role of the government, but what I'm trying to say is that this is a public cause, and I think all your participation here coming together is illustrating that more than anything else. Of course, when we are spending so much money, we are often asked questions saying, are you doing the right thing? Are you investing in the right technology? Is this the right stage? I've been asked this several times. The rest of the world is moving to 2 nanometers and 1 nanometers, and you guys are stuck at 28 nanometers and 40 nanometers and 60 nanometers. How does this make sense as policy? I think it's carefully considered policy, and it is worth repeating on this occasion that we have to strike a balance. We are not a very rich country yet. We are already the 5th largest economy, but on a per capita basis, we are not a rich country. Therefore, there are limits of the fiscal capacity of the government as to what you can afford. And what we can afford is what we need to attempt to do. And so the roadmap on this is fairly clear, and that again is significant for today's event. One part of it is we invest in bringing in the capacity to manufacture semiconductors in this country. That is important because it's a crucial sector, it's a strategic sector. We've attempted ever since 1962 to bring it into the country at scale, and we have failed. Therefore, this is the time to actually attempt and make sure that we succeed to bring it. And therefore, it will be historic when actually the first chip comes out of Micron's facility later this year. That is the importance. Now we can go to the very small, most advanced technology, try to leapfrog and do it. But our chances of success are not great. The risks we would be taking are significantly greater. The costs are going to be that much higher. That is something that a country at this stage of development would find difficult to afford. Therefore, the strategy is a little different. We are aware that at the nodes which are going to get manufactured in the country, there's a fair amount of demand in some of the areas that Sri Utpal Shah already outlined in his talk as to which are the segments that they are going to focus on. So there is a mature market, there's a mature technology, we find our place into that, and as he pointed out, it's not easy. Even looking at a 28 nanometer fab, and I visited the fab that he mentioned, the PSMC fab in Taiwan, which is attempting to be rebuilt here, it looks like something out of a science fiction movie. And it has everything, there are hardly any people inside the fab, everything is sort of moving above your head in terms of everything wanders around, and machines turn on and turn off by themselves, and there's a lot of whirring and purring going on inside on the factory floor. It doesn't look like a factory floor at all. It looks like something out of Star Trek, one of those space age stations. We've not done that kind of advanced manufacturing before. It's a challenge. We have not built a fab, and the complexity of building it is something we have not done before. It's a challenge. For the best companies in India, it's a challenge. So we have to get there. We'll get there step by step. But the next steps, so if you come to 28 nanometers, what happens next? You have to actually research and go beyond that. And that is something I think is the next step, which is why today's gathering is so important, of industry and academia coming together and planning out how do we actually research and move to the next steps of how do you take this to 14, how do you take this to 7, how do you take this to 4, how do you take this to 2? And it's a roadmap. We've started a journey. It will take 15, 20 years to complete, but we will start today. So that's why when you look back on what SENS has done over 20 years, you'd really look forward as to what we can achieve over the next 15 or 20 in taking India to those cutting edges of technology, to those elements of it. And that's where I think the genius of India's researchers needs to come. It's one thing which Mr. Anand Ramurthy mentioned, that they are the fastest growing, largest GCC in India. 20% of the workforce in semiconductor design is in India. We don't have one person who's actually worked on a fab. I remember Professor Vasu telling me the first time that I came to visit their facility here in SENS that they have a huge turnover of all the technicians who work there because they're leaving them to find jobs with private sector fabs. I said, why are you so worried about it? It's a good thing. I mean, let's use this facility to actually train more people to be available for the market and be available to what needs to be done. As a country, we're not very fond of working with our hands and getting our hands dirty and doing it. That's what the fab really is. And we need to get more people to work in that space, train more people, and that's how all of these centers contribute to the next stage. When you go to Guwahati, and Tata's big facility is coming up in Guwahati, and we are working with IIT Guwahati to make sure that they are able to supply the human resources which are needed to actually make that fab work. So we contribute at that level. The second level we contribute, of course, is in the design space. Point was made that unless the design ecosystem really picks up, you're not going to have the fabs being loaded literally. You have to have the designs which will load those fabs, and we'll have to get it done. So that is something where in the design space, we need to work and move forward. And design space is all about owning the IP, having India designed products eventually, and moving in that direction. We're very happy that we have so many GCCs, multinational GCCs in the country. You're creating this human resource to enable the spillover. Some of the people will leave that possibly. Some of the startups we have here today probably have left GCCs and they're trying to branch off on their own. You'll establish IP. Some of you will probably be bought over by the same MNCs tomorrow saying you've done a wonderful thing. Some of you will survive and probably establish and grow as India's own companies, fabulous companies. We are investing in those few of you, even if 1 or 2 or 3 out of those of you who are present here today come out and do that. I think it's an investment which has been well worth it. And we would sort of be enabled and take pride in the fact that the entire program has succeeded. We're working, as at the end of the government, we keep working on these elements. We're working on further improving the design-linked incentive scheme in the semiconductor space to achieve some of these objectives, to not limit it only to startups and MSMEs, which we have done right now, but to expand it to a wider group, to ensure that there is more, there are larger companies who can invest and take this forward. We are working to ensure that the intellectual property stays Indian. We would very much appreciate even if, you're Micron India, for instance. So if you want to own the IP as Micron India here in India, I think it's wonderful. Eventually, it's Indian IP which is getting used. The ownership is not important because the ownership is global. If you look at, it's very interesting. If you look at Tata Electronics' two efforts, one of course is a JV, or rather they have a technology agreement. In the other, the technology is something that they are developing themselves by just having brought back a large number of Indian expatriates and people of origin to actually work on the technologies and move forward. So that is the spillover effect of the Indian diaspora, of people who have worked all over the world, developed a lot of this technologies themselves and are coming back now to actually do this. And who knows, given what geopolitics looks like, we may see a lot more of this in the days to come, in the decades to come, and we can see a lot more of that develop. So in that sense, I think we are less fussed about who actually owns the entity. We are more concerned that it needs to be Indian intellectual property eventually, and design a scheme on that basis, and that hopefully should also bring in a lot more risk capital. And there are venture capitalists present here today. Part of our design is to make sure that we co-invest with venture capitalists. You are better at picking the winners. Government is not so wonderful at picking winners. We tend to be more conservative. We will only back people who will actually succeed, but that's not how venture capitalism works. You have to be prepared to back a number of them. A few will succeed, a few will fail. You have to accept the failures with success. We can ride alongside you rather than trying to pick the winners ourselves and see how it works. So to that extent, we're willing to sort of be in the background, invest alongside you, support the risk capital as it comes into the area of design, as it comes into more areas where fabulous companies can actually develop in this country. And that is another critical outcome that we'll be looking at. But let's not for a moment imagine that our job is done. It is a long, hard slog. We have done significant and important first steps. In a sense, we've built the critical momentum, and it's something that will finally succeed and work in India, and we'll have to push this forward. One point I already made was about where we are in terms of the stage of technology and how we need to push forward through research and through our own efforts to take it to the next step. The other point I'd just like to make is that we're going to invest in these 5 companies, the 4 OSAT companies and the 1 fab company. When you actually look at their entire output, today in India, the current demand for semiconductors is about $45 to $50 billion, likely to go up to about $100, $110 billion by about 2030. And when they are at their peak production, the combined production of all the 5 companies is going to be $6 or $7 billion. So we are still a very small proportion of even the semiconductor output that we need for the country. Some of it will of course get exported, which it needs to, because only then you establish that it's actually competitive and it is a quality product that everyone wants to buy. But clearly we need to expand. The game is not yet done. We need to be bigger players. There's more investment that needs to take place. The Honorable Prime Minister, during the Semicon event which was held last September in Greater Noida, did point out that there will be continued support to this particular sector in the years to come.